How do you get over your fake ADHD and become a real writer? Because I know countless authors who can't finish a project or even sit down at the desk, and they claim and use ADHD as a crutch. Everybody and their mom has ADHD now. But in this video, I'm going to show you guys the way out of ADHD bitch assness. And there's going to be no Andrew Huberman optimized supplement stack or solution. We are going to de-optimize you. With this program I'm going to show you today, you can drink, smoke marijuana, goon out, and do any other dopamine raising activity that you want and go to sleep whenever you want. Because none of that actually matters if you are in alignment with something bigger than yourself. This is what all the little optimization biohacking nerds never talk about, which is that if you are doing a project, a novel that's bigger than yourself, bigger than your little story and your little idea, then you will have all the motivation in the world to finish your novel. Because I know countless little sci-fi and fantasy authors, and I'm not talking about the real sci-fi and fantasy authors like Dune, Hyperion, Lord of the Rings, C.S. Lewis, Steve Erickson. I could go on and on. Not those people. The fantasy and sci-fi for fantasy and sci-fi's sakes people. And they are endlessly working on project. Always have characterless and plots and novels and Dungeons and Dragons storylines that never go anywhere. And they have the autonomous right to do that. And I support people playing with words and having fun with it. But if I took Johnny's book and little sci-fi book and I gave it to 200 million people and forced them to read it, would the world be any different? Would there be any real positive or negative ripples in the world? And the answer would be no. And I want you to think right now, if that was the case for your novel, let's say it became the best of the bestsellers, on the level with the Bible in terms of how many copies it's selling. What kind of change would it create in the world? Because if I look at many of the books behind me and they sold at the level of the Bible and were read at the level of the Bible, there would be massive positive changes and personal soul level transformations happening. Because when it comes to motivation, there is an unconscious messaging that's always happening that says, why am I doing this? Is this really worth it? Why should I be doing this novel instead of X, Y, or Z? And so people who are struggling, instead of trying to discipline yourself with writing routines or whatever other BS, you may need to actually realize that your project is rotten at its core. Because if you are just writing to write a story, well, there are 4 million books published every year. And because of AI in the 2030s, there will be tens of millions of books published every single year. And with virtual reality and digital technology becoming better, stories are easy to come by. A good story is the easiest part of being a writer. Like coming up with one, that means nothing. But what happens on a stylistic and a soul level is what separates you from everyone else, all the other artistic genres. Because across a 100 to 500,000 word novel, you can actually create a soul transformation in a person. And so I believe, first and foremost, if you are actually doing that, there's something magic and spiritual happening. And I know all my little atheists out there are triggered. Oh my God, I'm still at level 0 of the game. But if you are connecting with a higher ideal, with something that's going to impact people, I don't necessarily believe in the linearity of time. And I think that you are already tapping into the future results if you are actually working on something big. And by future results, I mean like the positive ripples when you are at the desk, like your body knows and the universe knows or whatever, that this is going to be a big deal. And what's happening to those people in the future is not little dopamine hits, because every transformative novel has little dopamine tricks and entertainment hacks and exploits the reader. But a transformative novel turns on the soul. They make us question things and it becomes a referent for everything else in our reality. And our job as an artist is to create the strongest referent possible so that people can strive and pull themselves up through our art. because people will always say, well, my little story, my little sci-fi story, or sci-fi stories in the past have changed people's lives, maybe at the start of their journey. And I understand that. But we have all the gatekeeping level one stories we need to awaken people out of no consciousness into some consciousness. And I want to hear your thoughts on this really fast, you guys. When you sit down and you say, I'm going to do this routine and I'm going to wake up at 5 a.m. and I'm going to write 3,000 words a day, how does that go? How does chug-a-lug and caffeine and all these things go? How has that worked out for you in your career? Because most of the authors behind me knew what they were doing. They knew that they were going to transform people. When you look at their in their archives and their letters and their drafts, and you look at the revisions that they were making, they were specifically adding certain symbols and contrast and thematic elements to ensure that would happen, which was a conscious effort by them to transcend the idea of just writing a story. And this is how they were able to spend so much time on their novels. How does Don DeLillo spend 5,000 hours on a novel? How does Cormac McCarthy spend 7,000 hours on a novel? And 90% of that is all revision. How do they have the tenacity to just keep revising and revising and revising? They know in their head that some dude later on down the road is going to be hit by this, and they're trying to make it into this work of art that has the ability to do that. Cormac McCarthy wrote Blood Meridian, which is just a retelling of Samuel Chamberlain's My Confession. The story had already been told, but much like Shakespeare, he retold it, transcended plot, transcended characterization, and focused on transformation. And McCarthy had the motivation to keep writing after decades of not selling any copies, after having to bathe in the lake and going through 2 divorces and not having any toothpaste. Why did he have that motivation? It wasn't because he thought he was going to make it big around the next block. It's because he attached himself to a higher ideal. And when you start going down the list of all the people behind me, you're like, wait, all of them had that. And the ones that stuck with that, we call goats. And honestly, right now, what feels better in terms of motivation? If I told you right now, your novel could entertain 20,000 people, and they'll be like, wow, that was so entertaining. What a great story. Or it could transform and make people change and ponder for maybe the rest of their life. What if 2,000 people were changed on that level? Which one would you rather have? I would take changing 100 people at the soul level rather than entertaining 100,000 people. Which brings up another good point, which is if you want to be a writer, and you should really think about this distinction, because I think that sitting in the middle and trying to be one of these people that says I do both isn't going to be good for productivity. There is, in terms of polarity, something there for personal development. For instance, if you say, I just want to make a bunch of money and tell some cool stories and just write, like be a full-time writer, and I don't care how I do it, then you will give up these literary ambitions, and then it will be a lot easier for you to sit down on the page and know what you are doing, because there'll be no questioning of your career and your choices. You're taking the path of fear. You're saying that I don't trust that my writing ability and my best work can support me, so I'm going to take the shadow route, which is, doesn't really matter. It's fine, and do this. And so if you're going to do that, then just do that. And you will be more productive because you will see the results. You will know that if I do this, then I will get this. But if you sit in the middle, like a lot of these people do, and either aren't exploiting completely or transforming completely, then your book sales and your motivation are always going to be at ground zero. And so over on my Substack, I have a free course called the Creative Flow Accelerator, where I talk about more specific hacks that I use to get out of writer's block, or to at least get my process going. Because I found that this initial creative urge to help people transform sometimes isn't enough to fight against, let's say, years of procrastination and phone addiction and stuff. And so I have a little mini course over there where I basically show you how to get that initial momentum. And it requires no getting rid of technology or any of that type of stuff, but how to actually kind of get over that first hump and then transcend into kind of this motivated and inspired energy that will carry you through all the way. And so I will put the link down in the description below for that. Thank you guys for being here, and I will see you very soon in the next video.